My name is Robert Tremblay. I'm the Associate Director of Admissions, as well as a 2010 graduate. And with the continuation of our series, this week we're going to be continuing on dry heat cooking methods. Last week we focused on saute. We talked a little bit about the different variations of dry heat cooking, where we're going to be using fat as a direct substance to cook the food. We use sauteed chicken breasts as an example for that. Other variations of that type of dry heat cooking would go into deep fat frying, pan frying, and other variations from there. This week, we're going to transition into another area of dry heat cooking where we're not going to be using fat as the main vehicle to be cooking the food. We're going to be using grilling techniques, and we're going to be using roasting techniques or baking. So roasting and baking are pretty synonymous. So we've got a pretty cool menu to show you today. It's going to highlight both of those methods. We're going to be doing a roasted spaghetti squash, which has really become a very popular ingredient over the last several years with the advent of a lot of these new diets that are going around. It kind of serves as a pasta substitute. I don't really think it tastes anything like pasta, but it's really delicious, even though it's just squash. So we're going to show you how to roast vegetables in that capacity. And then we're going to show you how to grill a New York strip steak. So really excited to dive into this side of things. Gives a lot of versatility to the type of ingredients that we're working with. Now, when we talk about dry heat cooking methods, we're always talking about ingredients that are going to have a nice, tender, meaty flesh to them. When we're talking about a protein that we want to cook with either roasting or through the grilling aspect of things, we want to have a nice tender piece of meat, whether it's a chicken breast, a nice delicate piece of fish. When we talk about the steaks that we're talking about today from the beef side of things, wanting to use a tenderloin, wanting to use a strip or a ribeye, those tender cuts of meats that are coming from the low activity parts of the animal. When we talk about cooking with vegetables, we're talking about that same type of element, something that is going to be firm at the start, but once it's cooked, it's going to have a nice meaty flesh to it. So when we talk about roasting a spaghetti squash, that is like one of the most idyllic variations of a vegetable that we want to take and roast and use it in that capacity. So the way that I've got it set up so far is I cut it in half. So there's a couple of ways that you can approach kind of getting into your spaghetti squash. Some people like to cut them into rings, keep them in a circle that way. For the application that I want to do today, I really want to highlight the long strands and the spaghetti technicality of the squash itself. So keeping it in this half shape format is going to give you longer strands to work with, and it's going to have a little bit more of that spaghetti type consistency as opposed to cutting it into smaller circles. So to clean it out, so I already did one half just to kind of speed things up, but it's just like removing the insides or the pits of a pumpkin. If you've ever done pumpkin carving, this area, the seeds and this kind of connective area is really what we want to get out. So what we're going to do, we're just going to clean this out into a bowl. Okay. You want to be a little bit rough with it, but not too rough. Just want to scrape out those seeds. Now, just like with a pumpkin, you can actually go ahead and roast these off. You can season them up a little bit, get some nice flavor into them, and have a nice little healthy snack if you want. But really, a lot of times, you're just going to discard these after using them. Not necessarily something that you always need to keep. It is something that if you want to keep is definitely an option. So we've got our insides cleaned out nicely. I'm going to set this off to the side. Okay. And so what we're going to do next is we're going to do a quick seasoning on these. Now, what I did was I went ahead and I made instead of just doing salt and pepper and some aromatics with it, I figured we'd do a nice dry rub, kind of get some meatiness into the vegetable that's going to go along with our steak. So in the seasoned salt, I've got paprika, I've got cayenne pepper, some garlic powder, some onion powder, even got a little bit of chili powder in there as well. So a lot of flavors coming in that's going to really season it up and give some life to the spaghetti squash, which tends to be a little bit bland. It does have some of those nice characteristics, that sweetness that comes through from the flesh of the vegetable as it is. But adding some flavor to it, it can definitely take a lot of seasoning and stand up to that. So we're going to kind of season up the crevice of it. We want to get it nice and covered all over the first half of our squash. Okay. Make sure that it's evenly distributed. Okay. Like I said, this can take a decent amount of seasoning, so don't be shy about being somewhat liberal with it. And the fact that we mixed in our salt into our other spices is going to season it with the salt, and it's going to season it with the peppers and the other seasonings that we added. Now, one of the key elements with roasting a spaghetti squash like this is you always want to put flesh side down so that the skin side is up. The reason we want to do this is that it's going to protect the flesh from burning, but more importantly is it's actually going to help generate some steam once we get it into the oven. It's going to help it cook faster and have a nice, moist, dense product for us to work with at the end. So going to get this into the oven really quickly at about 400 degrees. Depending on the size of the squash is going to vary, so the timing is always going to change. What we're looking for with this is about fork tender. So roughly about 30 to 45 minutes is the typical range that you're going to be looking with the spaghetti squash. But after about a half hour, just check it with a fork, and I'll show you a little bit at the end once we get the finished product, how that kind of should go into the squash itself. So I'm going to get this into the oven. So like I said, about 45 minutes should be good for that. And now we're going to transition over to the next step of our dish. So what I've got here is a beautiful representation of a New York strip steak. Keeping with the theme, as I was talking about before, we want to use low activity, tender cuts of meat when we're doing the grilling process. For this, it actually comes from the short loin of the cow, which is sort of right in front of the tenderloin, or those of you might be familiar with filet mignon, which is what the cut of the tenderloin is. So this is directly in front of that, and it sits on top of the ribeye. So if you've ever seen a T-bone steak, that's actually a cut of steak that has both the New York strip on it and the ribeye. So it's kind of a, really big time delicious treat. But for this, we've reduced it down to just the New York strip steak. So very tender. You can see the marbling that's running through there is a little bit higher in fat content than the traditional fillets that a lot of people enjoy. This is my favorite cut of steak, even more so than the ribeye. That little additional extra bit of fat to go along with the beautiful cut of tender meat just really puts a lot of flavor into it and really does a great job. So with a cut of meat like this, we don't need to get really fancy with it. We don't need to beef up the seasoning too much. We really want to let the meat shine through and let that be the vehicle that carries through to the end. So we're just going to season this with some salt and pepper. I'm going to put on a second glove to make it a little bit easier. Always working with the food safety side of things in mind. And so this is when I worked at Morimoto in Manhattan shortly after graduating from CIA. I worked on the grill station there, and so we did steaks and endless amounts of steaks on that station. And when I first started working there, and I was seasoning and I was like being really delicate with it, my sous chef came over to me. He goes, "You got to make that salt rain on your steaks. You want to make sure it's well seasoned." So he says it got to look like nicely fallen snow. So you don't want to be shy about seasoning your steak. You want to make sure that you give it all that even distribution of love with the salt, and then we're going to finish it with some pepper as well. Okay. Another element that you want to be mindful of about not trying to use too many additional herbs and spices is that if you use too many of them, when you go to cook them, they're going to burn on the heating surface. So a limited amount of seasonings is going to allow it to cook evenly, and the browning is going to be on the meat and not just the browning of the herbs or the spices that you put on the outside. So that's always something that you want to keep in mind when you're working with an ingredient like this of such a high quality, that you want to make sure that that's what's shining through and not burnt herbs that's stuck to the outside of it. Okay. So we're going to transition over to our grill here. Okay. We've just got a simple grill plate. Now, when we talk about the heating method of grilling, really it's about generating heat from underneath. It's very similar to the same process that we would use to cook something through the broiling method, which is another variation of dry heat cooking. However, the difference there is our broiler is going to heat it directly from the top. When we use a grill, the heat is coming from underneath. So same type of process, but just a little bit different execution of how we're going to work with it. Now, these grill plates are awesome for working inside. I would much rather be outside, although it's January here in the Northeast, but grilling outside is kind of, hand in hand, but we're going to make do with what we got. So we're just going to use a little bit of cooking spray here on our grill plate. And now this is one of the most important parts in the process, is to make sure that we put our steak onto the grill so that we can execute some nice grill marks. Now you can see the angle of the lines that we have here. So we want to make sure that our grill marks are going at an angle. We don't want them just be crisscross like a checkerboard. We want there to be some kind of interesting depth to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay it down here on an angle following it, and then I'm going to rotate it, and it's going to give us a nice diagonal look on the steak's grill marks. So I want to press those down, make sure that we have some even coverage, making sure that the meat is in direct contact with the grill plate itself so that we get some nice cooking doneness on it. And really, for each set of grill marks, you're going to want to let it go for about 2 to 3 minutes. Really want to develop those grill marks because that's going to be the presentation of our steak. That's going to be the beauty of it. So we're not going to have another time to sear it or anything like that. This is when the beauty comes through, is through the grill marks and how a chef can really put their signature on a nice piece of steak. So we're going to let that go, let that start to cook. And now we're going to transition to really the sauce that we're going to be doing with this. Now, I don't know if any of you watching in your classroom or at home are familiar with compound butters. Compound butters are a great way to make a really simple, flavorful sauce to go on an accompaniment with something like a steak or with the vegetables that we're working with. Essentially, a compound butter is just whole unsalted butter that you've infused flavors to with herbs, aromatics, really whatever you want. It can have a wide variety of different elements. So over here, I've got about ½ pound of whole unsalted butter that I've let sit out to room temperature. You want it at room temperature so that it's movable and pliable, and you can incorporate ingredients to it. So it's going to get the butter into our bowl, okay? And then what the variation of compound butter that we're making is just going to be a classic hotel butter, a maitre d' butter, if you will. And that's going to be a combination of fresh lemon juice. It's going to be about ½ ounce to an ounce of lemon juice, depending on how much acidity you like. So it's really about to taste. We're going to add some fresh parsley and then some fresh minced garlic as well. Okay. So before I do that, I'm just going to check our steak here. Beautiful. You can see the first side. We've got some nice grill marks started. Okay. And all I'm going to do now, instead of just putting it down on the same side, I'm just going to rotate it to the other side. And that's going to give us that nice crisscross effect and that diamond look for our grill marks. So we're going to let it go a little bit longer on this side, so that way we can develop that additional color. Then we'll flip it to the over and do the same process. So we want to have even striping on our steaks. Those grill marks, like I said, is going to be the real decoration for that. So perfect. So we've got our butter. I'm going to kind of mush this around a little bit so that we can start to work in our other ingredients, okay? Very important, like I said, to make sure that you get this butter to a nice soft state. If you want to microwave a little bit ahead of time, that's fine. Just make sure that it doesn't melt all the way. You want it to be kind of in its whole state and pliable, so that way you can roll it up and I'll show you how to kind of put it into its original form again, okay? So we've got our butter well put together. I'm going to add in our fresh lemon juice. Perfect. Our garlic. We'll put it all. We want some flavor in this. And then we're going to add just about all of our parsley. So for about ½ pound, like I said, you're going to want about a ½ ounce to an ounce of lemon juice. You're going to want about ½ clove of fresh garlic. And then you're going to want about a tablespoon or so of fresh parsley to go in there. So sprinkling that in. Now we're going to work this in. And I want to get these ingredients into my butter before I start to actually season it. I want to get all of those flavors in, and then I'm going to season it with some salt and a little bit of pepper at the end. Okay, perfect. And so I know it seems a little bit strange to refer to this as a sauce, but once we get this into its cylindrical shape that I'm going to show you in just a minute, what we're going to do is we're going to let the cold butter melt down on top of the hot steak at the very end, and that's actually going to turn it into a sauce for us. So really a cool way to kind of change up the tone of things a little bit and get a little bit more out of what you have on hand. So you can have a little bit of salt here. Okay. going to give this a quick taste. Should be good. Don't want to take too much. Perfect. Exactly what you're looking for. Okay. We're just going to flip over our steak now. We should have some really nice grill marks here. You can see, very nice. We're just going to flip right over. We're going to let that continue to cook. We want to take this to a medium rare doneness on this. So I always work to the touch when we talk about the doneness of a steak. So what you're really looking for is when you take your fist, and if you let it relax and you're not flexing your hand in any way, that's sort of the tenderness that we're looking for with raw. When you squeeze it about halfway, then we're getting to about medium rare, a little bit more, and you're going to end up with about medium. And then when you make a tight fist, that's well done. That's not what we want here. Now, I come from the school of if you're paying for a steak, you have the right to order it any way you want. Since this is going to be my lunch, I'm doing it medium rare, and I'm really excited about today. So the second side is going to cook a little bit quicker than the first side because it's kind of come up to temp a little bit. So we're going to switch this a little bit faster, but we'll let it go for about a minute or two, and then we're going to switch it over to the other side. Okay. Perfect. So our butter is ready. Okay. I'm going to bring this out over here. So now what we're going to do is so I have Saran wrap here, and I just have the parchment paper, thank you, baby. The parchment paper underneath it, just as a guide, so I knew where the Saran wrap was. So we just want to fold this over onto our butter, okay? And then we're going to roll it, okay? Roll it to the end, okay? And then we're going to roll it tight. So you want to roll these ends really tight, and you want to get this into basically a log is what you're looking for. So a nice cylindrical shape, perfect. And then we're going to quickly tie the ends of the butter. Perfect. Here you have it. Perfect. So now we're going to get this into our refrigerator really quickly so that it can solidify. I've already got a log out and ready to go. So we're going to let this kind of warm up a little bit so that it's easy for us to slice. Okay, I'm going to check our steak, which is looking beautiful. Okay, like that. Steak is coming down really nicely. It's starting to smell really good in here. Okay. Going to clean up our station, and then going to quickly get our steak off. This is right there. All right. So I'm going to quickly get our steak off of the grill. Let that rest. I'm going to kill our heat there. And so next step, we're going to get our spaghetti squash. I've already got one ready to go. So after about 45 minutes or so, this is what you should see. This is kind of what it should look like. You'll get some caramelization and coloration on the parchment paper, which is just fine. That color is going to transcend into the color of the squash itself as well. So you're going to get some nice caramelization there. Now I want to show you quickly that fork tenderness that we were talking about before and what we're looking for. Now, very important to let these sit. I didn't have these raring at the 400-degree oven, so these were holding at about 150 to keep them warm for the demonstration, but you definitely don't want to take them 400 degrees right out of the oven and use your hands like this. You can see we've got that great coloration on them, on the squash itself. The seasoning that we used has really kind of come through nicely, and you can see how easily that fork goes right into the squash. That's exactly what we're looking for. But we don't want it falling out of the shell. That's an important thing to keep in mind. We want there to be some structural integrity, some fibrousness, so that it has those strands, okay? And so now I'm going to show you how easy it is to now complete your spaghetti squash. All you need to do is take a fork, and all you're going to do is you're going to scrape out the insides. You see how easily that happens? It's beautiful. You can see the strands that start to develop. Looks exactly like spaghetti. It's really one of the coolest things. I honestly was not familiar with spaghetti squash until I came to CIA. Granted, I'm a 2010 graduate, so this was a little bit before, you know, the fads became, you know, what they were with regard to spaghetti squash, and now it's available everywhere. But first time I had this, it was like one of the most amazing things I've ever tasted because it was just so unique to me. But the fact that it's readily available in every single grocery store really kind of makes me a happy man. So it's really a nice treat to be able to use in place of the spaghetti if you want to. But really, I like serving it as a side dish because I just love the taste of spaghetti squash. So we've got this ready. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use this compound butter not only for our steak, but I'm also going to reheat and reflavor our spaghetti squash in the saute pan with this butter also. So a nice way to connect the two dishes that we're making, the side dish with the main entree, is to combine the sauces and make them equally effective for both sides. So I'm going to cut in a piece of that. Okay. Just going to get the Saran wrap, another one. Very important to make sure that you remove the Saran wrap. I've worked in restaurants where that mistake was made, where it went out that way. It's not something that you want. You want to make sure that you remove the plastic wrap with everything. So one important thing that I make sure to do is only do a single layer of Saran wrap, so that way you know when you get it off, it's off, because it's just going to be one layer. So I'm going to let that sit for just a minute. Okay, we're going to let this cook down a little bit. Perfect. Now we're going to toss in our spaghetti squash, the butter, really great. This is going to come together really nicely. I'll let that continue to saute and make sure it's nice and piping hot, ready to go with our steak. So I'm going to let that continue to cook. Now I'm going to get our plating ready. Now we're going to get our steak. Beautiful steak has rested. We've got our grill marks to show off. And I'm going to do a sliced steak on this just because I like the presentation of it, but you could just as easily serve this whole if you wanted to. Really just depends on the preference. And a lot of restaurants, they give the guests the preference if they want it sliced to share or if they want it whole. Really just kind of depends on how they order it. Okay. I'm going to put on another glove. Okay. I'm going to slice this down. Beautiful. Get that nice pink center in there. Just there. Okay. Set this to the side. Quickly clean up our station. Perfect. One of the most important things going through the program is learning about the sanitation side of things, and so always having a Sani bucket ready to go is a very important part of the process. So I'm going to just dry up a little bit so that we can get our butter ready. So our spaghetti squash is looking fantastic. Get up a nice portion of this right next to our steak. Put on one more glove because we're using ready-to-eat food here. So we want to get another slice of our compound butter ready to go. Get our Saran wrap off. And then we serve the butter right on top of the steak like that. We let it melt for a little bit. And there you have it. Beautiful grilled steak and roasted spaghetti squash alongside a compound butter. Enjoy.